Okay, just making sure it's recording like it's supposed to. So today's book review I'm actually pretty excited about. This is my long time coming return to the books by James Dashner. And I yet again read all three of these books that I'm going to be reviewing in this video on my Kindle. And so we're going to be going through the Kill Order, the Fever Code, and the one called Crank Palace, which takes place during the Death Cure book. And it specifically follows a certain character, but the other two I mentioned are actually prequels to the Maze Runner trilogy. Now, if you've seen the video I made on the Maze Runner trilogy itself, it was kind of a different book review compared to ones I've done in the past. Instead of being solely a book review, it was more of a book and movie comparison because, like I said in the video, there were certain things the movie series did and there were certain things the book series did that I thought were pros and cons. And then there was also the issue of Teresa's betrayal in the Scorch Trials, which is book 2 of the Maze Runner trilogy. And it goes a little different in the books than how it does in the movies, and the aversion that Thomas develops toward Teresa I felt was justified in the movie series, but not in the book series. But having hopped into these books, the prequels, my opinion may be slightly different, but we'll get into that later. So, starting with the book known as The Kill Order, this is not directly related to the majority of the cast that you see in the Maze Runner trilogy. However, there are certain cameos here and there. So, if you were looking for a book that wastes absolutely no time at getting things rolling and barely gives you a chance to take a breath, then The Kill Order is the book for you. So, The Kill Order takes place before the Maze Runner trilogy, as I've already said, but it takes place primarily in two different points in time. So you follow a main character and his group of friends that have kind of come together through all the horrors that they experience, and that is the sun flares that scorch the earth, and then when the flare virus itself that makes people go crazy first began to happen. So, for the most part, you're with this group of people as the flare virus breaks out, and you get to see how it is spread initially and how it comes to be, and then the effects, how quickly it affects all the people on the planet. So that's the primary timeline point here. But it has several flashbacks with the same characters to the time of when the sun flares themselves hit 1 year prior to when the flare virus broke out. And another detail I'm going to add in here is that the Kill Order primarily takes place near Asheville, North Carolina, which is actually pretty close to home for me. So that was actually kind of neat to read through that book, and it almost made it more relatable, I should say. But aside from that, it really is an amazing book, and honestly speaking, because not only are you seeing what these characters experienced when the sun flares hit and when that took place, the details that the author put into it is just stuff I wouldn't have thought about, the conditions that they had to face. So it was really fascinating from that standpoint. And then you learn, with everything with the flare virus after the fact. They started in New York City and got to, Asheville, North Carolina, and the reason why everybody seemed to gravitate towards that area is because of the mountain ranges, and supposedly those areas survived better during the flares because of that reason. But what is really interesting about the book is that pretty much the majority of the characters that we are following here succumb to the flare virus. The main character especially, you are going through this horrific adventure with him with these goals that this group has, all the while the flare virus symptoms are becoming worse and worse. He's getting closer and closer to losing his mind, and here the way it is described, the way he ponders things and interprets his surroundings, is just really fascinating to go through. And there is one character within this group that they kind of bring into their group that has greater significance on the storyline in the next prequel and in the Maze Runner trilogy as a whole. You just don't know who it is yet until the very end. You kind of sort of suspect it a little bit, but it doesn't become clear until the very end. But that one was probably, out of the three I'm reviewing in this particular review, that one was probably my favorite of the three. Like, it is so well written. It has redeemed the Maze Runner series in my eyes, the book anyway. Like, I think the movies are great and even better than the books, and that's the only book series, as I've said before, where I hold that opinion. But it really revitalized my interest in the Maze Runner universe, because in my opinion, book 2 at Teresa's betrayal is when things took a turn for me in the Maze Runner trilogy, and it wasn't as enjoyable after that, mainly because of how Thomas was behaving after the fact. But that's in a different video. You can watch it if you want. I won't go into full detail here. So, hopping into the second prequel book, The Fever Code, this is where we return back to the main group of characters: Thomas, Teresa, Albie, Mino, Newt, all of them. So the Fever Code is actually the story of how the maze was built. And it's in this book that you realize just how ginormous of a part Thomas and Teresa had in creating the maze itself and the various trials that would come while they were in operation. You also see several different things that are, I would call them cameos, if you would, because there are a lot of things that are set up that take place in the Maze Runner trilogy itself, up to all the way into the Scorch trials, certain things that the characters find by exploring the Wicked facility. Because that's another thing we learn, is that up until the flare virus broke out, you learn in the Kill Order that the main two populaces or congregations of people is Asheville, North Carolina, and somewhere in Alaska. And you learn that the prime Wicked facility is actually in Alaska. So in the Maze Runner trilogy, where the mazes were built, so all the times they went to the same place in the Death Cure and all of that was in Alaska the whole time. And I can't remember if they revealed that or not in the Maze Runner trilogy. It's been a while since I've read them. But it's really interesting to see how they identify certain geographic locations to certain well-known locations in the book. So it's in this book where my opinion on Teresa and Thomas's relationship kind of take on a different light than what it did after the Scorch trials. Because it's in this book that you learn, through a shocking twist, that she might have been quite the treacherous person to begin with. And it's really fascinating because you also get more interaction with the character Ava Page, which is higher up in the Wicked facility that you see in the Maze Runner trilogy a couple times here and there. You know, it's her email messages that end each and every book in the trilogy. So she's a prominent character in the Maze Runner trilogy. Always in the background, pulling the strings, controlling everything, that sort of thing. But it's really with Teresa and Ava Page that you learn just how certain people can come to rationalize and even justify the horrible things that they do in the interest of what they call the greater good. So they will literally sacrifice anything and everything to find a cure for this virus, for example. And it's really, like, it's really crappy what happens to Thomas at the end of this book. And you learn that, so I'm just, for the interest of context, I'm going to say a really big spoiler right here and now, so skip like 30 seconds ahead of my next sentence if you don't want to be spoiled of a big thing at the end. But you learn Thomas comes up with the idea of being put in the maze with Teresa, Eris, and Rachel with their memories intact. And he makes the mistake of trusting Teresa in the process. And behind his back, she convinces Dr. Page and the psychs who are in charge of creating the trials and interpreting the brain activity of the subjects, as they call them. She somehow gets it worked out to where Rachel and Thomas get inserted into the maze without their memories, but Teresa and Eris get inserted into the maze with their memories intact. And so it just puts the whole Maze Runner trilogy into a completely and totally different light. So you realize that things were far different than what you originally thought, and certain people were a lot more treacherous from the very beginning than what we even realized. And so now I'm at the point now where it's like, okay, so the best thing Thomas could have ever done was just kick Teresa to the curb. It was just so that they did my man dirty, is what they did. It's just like, it's one of those like, oh man type situations how they did him. But I highly recommend reading both of those books so you can see how exactly things unfold, because it's truly fascinating. So I'm going to leave that one and hop into the book called The Crank Palace. So The Crank Palace is a book that takes place during the third Maze Runner book called The Death Cure. And what it does is it primarily follows the point of view of Newt. So if you've seen my other video or you've read The Death Cure, you know that at some point during the story, Newt makes the decision himself while he's away from the group to just leave. Because unlike his friends, he is not immune. So he is currently infected and starting to succumb to the flare virus. And the unfortunate side is that there is no cure. So rather than forcing his friends to watch him slowly go insane, he makes the decision just to leave himself, leaving barely a trace of his whereabouts. And so he decides to go on his own little path. And things are definitely looking bleak for our guy here. He's just his only hope in life now is that he's just going to slowly lose his mind on his own, and he won't hurt any of the ones that he loves. And it's very depressing in that aspect, the loneliness and the isolation that comes from that. But it's in this book that you learn what he got up to after he splintered off from his main group of friends that he had been with throughout the entire trilogy up to this point. And it's in this book that he temporarily discovers a new purpose that he can fulfill. And he basically, this one last good thing that he can do before he finally succumbs to the virus and becomes a mindless, cannibalistic animal, pretty much. And it's really, I'm not going to say the book has a happy ending. Like, a lot of the parts of it are pretty sad and depressing, but I still think it's worth the read because it gives you much bigger closure on the character of Newt, because he had played such a gigantic part in this series up to this point. And just the ultimate sacrifices that he makes, like, it really just makes you fall in love with the character even more. And I will say that there's a voice of a character that you hear at the end that I'm pretty sure is Dr. Ava Page. And you really, like with the Fever Code, but also in this book, you learn just how human she actually is in spite of the horrific things that she did to all of the kids in the Maze Runner trials, the Maze trials, the Scorch trials, and everything else. But it's also at this point in the story where I think she realized that the search for a cure is futile. They're not going to find one, so that's where she changed her tune. And instead of trying to test them to find a cure, figure out why they're different, she switched gears and started to, as I said in the other video, she started to collect all of the immunes that they could find so that they could transport them to this undisclosed location to where they could live out their lives and continue the population while the rest infected with the flare would eventually die out. That was the hope anyway. But from the sounds of it, that may not be the case, because there is a sequel trilogy that I'm going to read and review as well, beginning with the book called The Maze Cutter, and the second book I believe is called The Godhead Complex. And apparently that series is going to be about, the children that came after Thomas's group of friends in this paradise that they were sent off to. Apparently the Cranks have evolved and become the super intelligent, sadistic race, and now they have to contend with that. So as far as I'm aware, there's 2 books out so far on that, the ones I mentioned, and there might still be a third one in writing. I haven't seen anything published yet, not that I've looked too in depth, but those are the 3 books for this particular review. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys take the time to, set out and read them yourself. Especially if you read any book in this one, definitely read The Kill Order. It's the earliest book in the timeline, and it can work just as well as a standalone as it can a part of the rest of the books. But I was talking to somebody, and I got him started listening to the audiobook on that one. And even he said it was like, man, this book wasted no time at all. Like, it just hopped right into it. And that's what I really appreciate for that. I'm so glad I started with that one. But yeah, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. See you next time.